One step, she was in range. As Brain stared at Shaltyr's neck, he noticed her mocking expression out of the corner of his eye. His target was the right ankle she was putting forward. He swung down with his katana, using his body weight to further hasten his blow. As he cast his stress aside, he was certain that this swing was faster than the previous one. Even he had no way of defending against a strike of that speed. I can do it. Just as he was about to slice off the girl's delicate ankle that revealed itself from beneath the hem of her skirt, the hilt of Brain's katana slid from his hands. Brain's line of sight did not move, and he had no idea what had happened. However, the special sensory abilities granted to him by Field made him acutely aware that his beloved katana was now on the ground, trod under a high-heeled foot. It was impossible. Yet, it was an undeniable reality. The reason Brain's katana had slipped was because of the shock transmitted into his hands when that high-heeled shoe had stepped on it. There was only one reason not to believe this. That reason was, despite heightening his focus to its limit, he still had not sensed his opponent's movements. Yes, not even within the field of which he was so proud. She was close enough that if she reached her hand out, she could touch him. Shaltyr's disdainful gaze landed on Brain from such a short distance. The startling pressure it generated threatened to crush the air along with Brain himself. Brain's breathing grew chaotic. His sweat flowed like rain, soaking his entire body. His field of vision trembled, and an intense feeling of nausea came over him. He had been through several risky encounters before, so desperate situations were a common sight for him. However, those encounters were little more than child's play compared to his present predicament. The high-heeled shoe pulled off the blade, and Shaltyr silently leapt away. "Are you done preparing yet?" Exclamation point. The third repetition of those words filled Brain with an incomparable sense of despair. Next, she would say, "Let the trampling begin." However, just as Brain thought that would happen, he heard something completely different. Could it be that you can't use martial arts? That voice, filled with pity and surprise, made Brain draw a sudden breath. He could give no reply. No, to be precise, he did not know what to say. Perhaps he could playfully reply like a clown, "Ah, I used them just now, but you defeated them easily." Biting his lower lip, Brain retrieved his katana. "Could it be that you're not actually that strong? I thought you were stronger than those chaps at the entrance. Sorry about that, I measure strength in meters, so I can't discern differences of a millimeter or two." He had worked so hard and so long. During the showdown with Gazef, he was overly confident in his natural abilities, so he had not trained and lost to someone who had. As a result, his defeat had turned into his motivation. The mindset he had developed, of standing up again from defeat, of earnestly honing his skills to produce results, were nothing but foolishness to the monster before him. This can't be happening. All along, I've been slaying those monsters who scorned me and mocked me for being weaker than them. As those thoughts rose through Brain's mind, he struggled to press them down, and in their place, aha. With a great shout, he made his move on Shaltyr. Brain swung at Shaltyr, who had a puzzled look on her face as she watched him attack, with all the force his body could muster. His blow, which marshaled all the muscles of his entire body, could easily cut an armored human being in half. Shaltyr had no intention of evading that stunning strike. The way she watched the gleaming arc of white light descending upon her made Brain think that he might be able to land a hit. However, the scene from earlier denied those thoughts of his. Could he really strike her so easily? In the next moment, those fears were confirmed. As a crisp ringing filled the air, Brain once more saw an unbelievable sight. Shaltyr had swiftly flicked the nail of her left little finger, roughly 2 centimeters long, with blinding speed. In addition, Shaltyr did not seem to be using any strength at all. The rest of her hand was balled up into a fist, leaving only the little finger sticking out, and it was slightly bent. With that motion, which did not even qualify as toying with him, she had parried that blow which Brain had struck with all his might. Parried that blow which could cleave full-plate armor, shatter swords, and break shields. Struggling desperately to pull together his shattered will to fight, he focused his strength into his hands which trembled from the impact of Shaltyr's parry. He raised his katana high and brought it down, and then, Shaltir still casually deflected it. Wapa Shaltir yawned in an exaggerated manner, even going so far as to pat her mouth with her right hand. She was intentionally staring at the ceiling now. It would seem she was no longer taking Brain seriously. Even so, Brain's katana had still been deflected by the little finger of her left hand. Yuh! A roar issued from Brain's throat. No, it was not a roar, but a cry of despair. Horizontal slash, parried. Diagonal slash, parried. Frontal slash, parried. Diagonal cut, parried. Vertical cut, parried. Horizontal cut, parried. No matter the angle, no matter the direction in which he made his attacks, all of them were deflected. It felt as though his katana was being drawn to that nail, and in that moment Brain finally understood. His opponent was truly powerful. Even his hard work and natural talents could not even bring him close to her feet, let alone onto her level. Era tired already? Though come to think of it, this nail clipper's pretty dull. Brain stopped swinging as he heard those surprising words. Could one cut through a mountain with a sword? That was impossible, even a child knew that. Then, could he beat Shaltir? Any warrior who faced her would know that answer. There was no way he could defeat her. Human beings could not defeat entities who were beyond human imagination. If anyone was able to stand toe-to-toe with her, that someone must surely be a mighty individual who was beyond the realm of mankind. Regretfully, Brain was merely a warrior who stood at humanity's peak. Indeed, no matter how hard he worked, as long as he was still a human being, he would be nothing more than an infant flailing around with a stick. I trained so hard. Trained hard? What a pointless statement. I was created strong, so there was no need to train hard in order to become stronger. Brain laughed as he heard this. I tried so hard and got so far. But in the end, it doesn't even matter. How self-centered was I, thinking I was a genius? His legs felt heavy, like they had been squashed by huge boulders. Ahahaha, what are you crying for? Did something sad happen? He understood what Shaltir was saying. However, her voice was muffled, as though it were coming from far away. Even his determination to train himself, the determination that let him burst the blisters on his hands to continue swinging a heavy iron bar, was meaningless. Wearing heavy armor and running long distances was meaningless. Defeating monsters by himself was also meaningless. It was all meaningless. Therefore, Brain's life was also meaningless. In the face of a truly powerful being, Brain was no different from the powerless weaklings he used to mock. I'm an idiot. Are you done? Then it's about time to wrap this up, no? Shaltir giggled as she advanced on him, her little finger extended. Brain cried out, not a warrior's call to battle, but a child's weeping. Brain ran wildly. He faced his back to Shaltir. Having experienced Shaltir's physical ability firsthand, he expected that she would catch up with him immediately. Still, he paid that fact no heed. Or rather, Brain no longer had the energy to worry about that sort of thing. He simply revealed his defenseless back to her, scrunching his face up into a tear and snot-filled mess as he desperately ran deeper into the cave. Just then, an innocent girl's voice, laced with bloodlust, came from behind Brain. Are we playing tag then? You're going to play all sorts of games with me? Then I shall enjoy myself. Ahahaha. Part 3. A cold wind blew through the main hall, slipping through the gaps in the barricade and washing over the surviving men of the death-spreading brigade, all 42 of them. The main hall was the most spacious part of the cave system, so it was commonly used as a dining area. However, it was now an emergency stronghold. This series of caves, the Cellsword's hideout, was centered around this long and narrow hall. Several smaller caves radiated off along its sides, and they were used as personal rooms, armories, and food storage. Therefore, if this place was taken, the other locations would also fall easily. When attacked, it thus made sense to designate this place as the linchpin of their final defensive line. That said, it might have been called a stronghold, but it had not been built to the standards of one. They had upended their crude tables and stacked up boxes to form a simple barricade. After that, they had strung up several chest-height ropes between the entrance to the main hall and the barricade, in order to ward off anyone who might try to charge the barricade. Once the enemy ran into the obstacles, the defenders could avoid being drawn into a melee. Almost everyone was arrayed behind this defensive formation, holding their crossbows as they waited in the center, left and right wings. Even if it came to a shooting match, the dimensions of the main hall and the size of the entrance gave an overwhelming advantage to the defenders in the hall. In addition, now that they had all spread out, the attackers would end up taking fire from all the defenders no matter where they decided to attack. Even area effect attacks would have trouble taking them out, because they were spread out. This troop arrangement was designed to provide covering fire, and it was called a crossfire. It was a simple formation, but it could hold off an enemy force larger than itself. And then, disquieted looks began appearing on the men's faces. As the men trembled, their chain shirts quivered along with them, producing the rustle of links sliding over other links. The interior of the cave was cool, and quite comfortable even on summer days. However, what they felt now was not exactly coldness. Just now, peals of laughter had rung in from the outside. Due to the echoes within the cave, it was transformed into a shrill, sexless laughter, which was what had chilled them to their bones. They believed that since the strongest man in the death-spreading brigade, Brain Unglaus, had sortied, there was no need for them to build a barricade or the like. That laughter had shattered their conviction. Brain was unbeatable. That was what they believed. Brain was far stronger than an ordinary man. Even Imperial Knights could not possibly defeat him. Not even monsters could. He could slay an ogre in one hit, charge into a goblin horde by himself and mow them down like grass. If the entire death-spreading brigade crossed blades with him, he might well end up taking all their heads. What else could they call him but their strongest man? But if such a man had been defeated, what did that mean? The fact that someone could fight Brain and still laugh like that could only mean one thing. Everybody knew it, but nobody dared to say it. All they could do was look silently at each other. The eyes of everyone gathered here went wordlessly to the entrance of the hall, in the direction of the rest of the cave. The tension in the air thickened, and then, the sound of running came toward them, growing louder and louder. Someone gulped loudly. The sounds of several crossbow strings being drawn back could be heard amidst the silence. As the Sellswords watched the hall's entrance, a man sprinted into view, panting heavily. It was a miracle that nobody had loosed their bolts at him. Brain. The man who shouted was the head of the mercenaries, the brigade's leader. Soon, a great cheer exploded through the hall. Their jubilant cheers came from their belief that he had defeated the intruder. There were sounds of voices congratulating Brain, as well as those of hands patting each other on the shoulder. They chanted Brain's name over and over again. Amidst this praise, Brain stood at the entrance to the hall, holding his weapon in one powerless hand as he quietly surveyed the faces of the Sellswords around him. No, that was not right. His expression suggested that he was looking for something. The cheering died down as though suppressed, as the Sellswords picked up on Brain's strange mood. Brain ran for the barricade. Oi! Wait up, we'll open up for you. Brain paid those words no heed as he squirmed into the barricade, forcing his way through without wasting a single moment before continuing his run. He felt the Sellswords stare dumbly at him as he opened a door. It led to a cave which was being used as a storeroom, and he rushed inside. What's wrong? Did he put something in there? Who knows? It feels weird though, was he crying? Nah, that couldn't be. They stuck their heads out to look at the closing door, but the mercenaries were thoroughly baffled by the strange event, which had transpired before them. Only one person here was frowning, the brigade's leader. This was because only he Brain knew as well, so that Maid too, had an idea of what was going on. However, he did not have the time to verify his suspicions. The sound of slow, graceful steps drew close, followed by the slow appearance of a stranger in the entrance. None of them had any idea who that person was. Since nobody in the band knew this stranger, it was clear that it was the intruder who had sparked this disturbance, and the commotion vanished in an instant. Impossible. If that were really the case, that would mean that the reason why Brain was here had now taken a 180-degree turn. If the intruder was still alive, it meant that he had fled here. In addition, there was only one intruder, its back hunched in a bizarre way. It was not tall and looked like a girl. Her arms hung limply below her, as did her head. The strange thing was that given the position of her head, and the bottom of her neck, it looked like the latter was 3 times longer than that of a regular human being. She had a full head of lustrous silver hair which dragged along the ground as she slowly entered the hall. She wore an exquisitely crafted dress, which seemed to be wreathed in darkness. Nobody spoke. A wave of heart-stopping cold accompanied this dreadful visage. Her head slowly came up, her face obscured by the strands of silvery hair. Through them, they could see a pair of red lights, which slowly narrowed down to needle sharpness. Everyone knew what this meant, much to their misfortune. She was laughing. That frightening girl raised her head, revealing a beautiful face. However, nothing could be more revolting to the people who had just seen the state of her. Those elegant features looked like a mask sculpted by a top-rate artist. Good evening, everyone. My name is Shaltir Bloodfallen. Is this the finishing point? Does this mean the game of tag is over? As she spouted those bewildering lines, the girl, Shaltir, looked around. However, that beautiful face of hers wrinkled, probably because she had not found the person she was looking for. In the unbroken silence, the girl's voice rang forth once more. Are we playing hide and seek, Noel? She giggled merrily, seemingly amused by this. Shaltir lowered her head and laughed and laughed and laughed, her silver hair shrouding her face. As the Sellswords gasped at the sight before them, Shaltir's laughter grew ever louder. Her full-bellied mirth echoed through the hall as the girl slowly raised her head again. The face they saw made the Sellswords feel like their hearts were being crushed in their chests, and that ice water was filling their veins. That face was no longer beautiful. The color flowing out of her pupils had dyed her eyes completely red, and the 2 neat rows of white teeth in her mouth now resembled a set of delicate syringe needles, like a shark's gaping maw. A lewd pink glow leaked from her throat as transparent saliva drooled from her mouth. Ahahahahaha. Shaltir bared her fangs and grinned, so wide that the corners of her mouth almost touched her ears. She laughed several dozen times, like the tolling of an off-key bell. Whimpers of despair filled the air of the hall. Though they were in a cavern, it seemed as though even the air could not bear it, and joined in with the resounding echoes. A girl? A monster? A fiend? It was none of them. This was terror incarnate. Despite the distance between them, they could scent blood on her breath. Due to the intensity of the stench, it seemed as though even the air was turning red. Uea! Overcome by panic, one of the Sellswords screamed and depressed the lever on his crossbow. The bolt tore through the air and embedded itself deep into Shaltir's chest. The impact made her waver slightly. Loose. Upon hearing their leader's voice, the Sellswords came to their senses, chased away their fear, and fired their crossbows as one. The bolts which shot out roared like a downpour, riddling Shaltir's body with projectiles. 31 of the 40 bolts fired had hit, each piercing deeply into her body. At this range, the bolts could even go through metal armor, so this was the logical outcome. In addition, the 4 which had entered her head would have been fatal for a human being. Someone breathed, "We killed it." Those words were the hope which all of them were clinging to. Although their foe was still standing, so many bolts stuck out of it that it resembled a porcupine. By common sense, it should have been definitively dead. Still, while that thought filled their minds, the smoking cinders of fear within their hearts could not be extinguished. As though driven by some kind of sixth sense, the Sellswords began reloading their crossbows. And then, Shaltir moved. Like a conductor preparing to direct a performance, she slowly spread her arms. The bolts which covered her body began working their way out, and then fell to the ground. None of them had so much as a single drop of blood on them, nor were their heads dented. It was as though they had never been used at all. Shaltir laughed, and a vile, predator's snarl appeared on her face. Scattered cries of terror rose from the frightened Sellswords. As though urged on by those cries, countless bolts ripped through the air toward Shaltir once more. The numberless projectiles impaled her eyeballs, pierced her throat, penetrated her abdomen, and sank into her shoulders. Yet the girl who had met such a grisly fate merely seemed annoyed, as though she had been caught in a drizzle. It's useless, but you still try so hard. She took a step forward, and then she leapt. The ceiling was about 5 meters above the cave floor. The girl jumped high enough to reach out and touch it easily. She sailed gracefully through the air and landed on the other side of the barricade. As her high heels clacked on the ground, all the bolts stuck in her fell off as well. She turned to look at the soldiers behind her, who were reloading their crossbows. She stepped forward and punched. She did not even put her back into it. It was a simple, casual punch. That said, it was possessed of extraordinary speed, and its destructive power was out of this world. Her hand pierced the body of the Sellsword she had punched, sending him flying into the barricade. With a heaven-shaking crash, the wood of the barricade disintegrated, spraying splinters everywhere. Only the silence of wood chips falling to the ground could be heard in the silence that filled the hall. The stunned Sellswords stopped reloading their crossbows, staring dumbly at Shaltir. Shaltir stuck her index finger into the mass of blood floating above her, and drew out a strand of blood, which turned into a character before her. It looked like a Sanskrit character or a similar symbol, and it was called a magic rune. Shaltir possessed a class called Blood Drinker, and this was one of its skills, Blood Pool. This orb of enchanted blood could store the blood of victims for various purposes. It could also drain mana from the blood, so one could use skills that augmented spells without consuming extra MP. Penetrate Magic Implosion. After casting this 10th tier spell, which was of the highest tier of magic, the bodies of 10 mercenaries began swelling up from inside. There was no time for them to cry out. All they could do was watch their bodies expand inexorably, looks of ignorant terror on their faces. Then, in the next moment, their bodies burst, like balloons popping. Ha 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 ha. Fireworks. How pretty! Shaltir pointed to the spraying blood, applauding and cackling as she did. Yuh! Following that cry, an estoc impaled Shaltir's chest from behind, piercing her heart. It sawed up and down, as though to widen the wound. Die, you monster! The broadsword swing after that nearly clove Shaltir's head in half, its point stopping after it pierced her left eye. You lot, hurry up and get stuck in. As wails and cries rose from them, 3 mercenaries hacked at Shaltir's body with the weapons they had at hand. They swung over and over again, but Shaltir still stood firm, despite having a broadsword buried halfway into that face of hers. Said face bore a frightening smile, with no sign that she was in pain at all. After they tired of attacking her, the Sellswords cast down their swords and switched to punching and kicking her, the tears streaming down their faces. Though they were much larger than she was, Shaltir remained unmoved. It was as though the Sellswords were assaulting a huge boulder. Shaltir tilted her head to look at the mercenaries and began thinking. Then she clapped her hands together, having thought of some devilish scheme. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha, ha 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 ha. She exhaled as though expelling the heat from within her. The thick stench of gore made the people around her nauseous. Shaltir carelessly wrenched out the broadsword stuck in her head. Once it was gone, there was no sign that she had ever been wounded in the first place. Just as she was about to swing it, she halted halfway. Rust covered the broadsword, and it slowly crumbled away. In her blood-addled mind, she thought about a penalty from one of her job classes, Cursed Knight, and she tossed it away in a vaguely disappointed manner. Then, she casually flicked one of those delicate ivory hands of hers. And thus, 3 skulls rolled to the ground. Run away. Run away. Run for your lives. We can't beat a monster like that. The Sellswords screamed and fled in all directions. Having lost all will to fight, one of the running men was seized from behind by Shaltir, who grasped his head with both her hands and squeezed. His head popped open like a shellfish having its carapace cracked open, and his brains squirted out. Ha 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 ha. What's that look on your faces, are you scared? Wait a minute, ha 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 ha. Hang on a bit, I'm Thythiot. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha, ha 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 ha. Their curiosity piqued by that sinister voice, the cell's words turned to see a stomach-churning sight. The blood-drunk queen of nightmares chased them down, not allowing a single mercenary to escape. One of the fleeing men stumbled, rolling beneath Shaltir's feet. Spare me. Please. I won't do anything bad again. As she looked on the man, crying and whimpering for mercy as he grabbed her leg, Shaltir's face split into a predatory grin. The cell's word immediately understood what that smile meant, and his face turned an ashen gray. So hiya thia you up new. Stop. Still clutching her leg, the man was lifted bodily into the air. With one hand clutching his back, she threw him lightly at the ceiling. Unable to resist her supernatural arm strength, the mercenary finally let go and squeezed his eyes shut. After a brief period of weightlessness, he felt the pull of gravity dragging him down again, and then his hand struck the ground, sending a gout of pain through his body. Wah! Being able to feel pain was proof that he was still alive. The mercenary, grateful for being able to escape death, eased his eyes open ever so slightly, and then he realized that he had been celebrating too soon. This was because Shaltir's slender ivory-white hands had gently embraced him, not allowing him to fully touch the ground. He had not escaped from the clutches of this terrifying monster. No, not just that, a gaping maw opened before him, looking like a lump of clotted blood, radiating a stench he had never encountered before. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha, how Furuwan did you really think you could die so easily? I nope, she said as she stuck her tongue out at him. Spare me, nope, I haven't fed in so long. Her mouth opened until it was past her ears, until it was big enough to gulp an entire skull down. Diamond suit, nobody here knew this. Nobody here knew that the monsters called true ancestors in the DMMORPG Yggdrasil were physical incarnations of disaster. The mouth that opened to the height of her ears was in a semicircular shape, and the two canines within it were long enough that they reached her chin. Her brilliant scarlet eyes were the color of blood, and the fingertips of her dried wood arms sprouted claws that were about 10 centimeters long. She looked like she was hunched over whenever she moved, and leapt at her prey in a flying charge. That was the posture she had. Vampires were monsters which were crossbreeds of humans and bats, and the high-tier origin vampires looked more monstrous than the others. The only vampire-type monsters, which could be said to be beautiful, were Shaltir's concubines, the vampire brides. The only reason why Shaltir the true vampire looked so beautiful was because her guild member, who designed her, was skilled at drawing and turning his art into reality. Shaltir's current appearance was her original look as a true vampire. In other words, her usual appearance was merely a sham.